Shah, Chairman NDDB, Mr. Gilles Fromo, President, International Dairy Federation, members of the IDF board, Ms. Lawrence Reichen, Director General IDF, other IDF delegates, executive directors, NDDB, NDDB colleagues, and colleagues from NDDB subsidiaries, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have with us Dr. Jamie Jonker, Chief Science Officer and Vice President of Sustainability and Scientific Affairs, National Milk Producers Federation, USA, and I have the privilege of introducing him to you. Jonker PhD is NMPF, as the National Milk Producers Federation is known as shortly, leads scientific expert on dairy issues ranging from animal health and sustainability to dairy farm biosecurity, air and water quality, and more. Jonker leads NMPF's engagement with scientific groups such as the US Animal Health Association, the International Dairy Federation, the World Animal Health Organization, and the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Jonker served on the IDF Board of Directors and as the chair of the IDF SPCC Science and Program Coordination Committee from 2020 to 2025. He is also involved in coordinating relations with Federation's Animal Health and Well-Being Committee and Environmental Issues Committee. Jonker received his BS degree and MS degree from Cornell University and his PhD degree from University of Maryland. Prior to joining NMPF, he worked at the National Academy of Sciences, the US Environment Protection Agency, and the US House of Representatives Committee on Agriculture. I invite Dr. Jonker and Dr. Minesh Shah to the dais and request Dr. Shah to welcome him formally by presenting a bouquet. Thank you, sirs. I now invite Dr. Jonker to address the gathering and share with us from his vast experience on sustainability across the dairy value chain. Dr. Jonker, please. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Manish Shah. Thank you, National Dairy Development Board here in India and the International Dairy Federation. I am here also with the other conference that's going on. It's my privilege to talk to you today, and what I'm going to call it is kind of a journey through sustainability. I don't have any slides. I typically give slides. People like to look at things, but I was thinking sustainability is different for everyone. So if I had put up slides today, it might have just been what I define as sustainability and how sustainability across the dairy value chain looks to me. So what I'm going to do is hopefully give you a flavor of sustainability from my opinion, but sprinkling in some thoughts that I have based upon my experiences that I've had both in the US dairy sector, being within the International Dairy Federation for nearly 20 years, and in part of that time being in leadership. And such things as even the technical tour that I was able to participate in with the IDF board yesterday here locally in Anand. And so that means we're going to have a journey. I'm first going to start with what are the three pillars of sustainability. It's environment, economic, and social. We're going to revisit those in a little bit in more detail, but I like threes for some reason. I think there's also three themes of sustainability. One planet, one health. I don't think many of us are going to live on the moon or Mars. There may be people in the future that do, but right now we have to live within our resources on this planet. The one planet, Earth. And the one health, because everything that we do as people in our environment, how we change and modify different parts of the globe, affects us all. One planet, one health. Sustainability also is planning at the global level, but you make action at the local level. I'll talk about a few examples later on about some of these really big overarching plans that different places in the world have. But without taking those plans and making action at the local level, those plans are not very useful. And then the last of my three themes of sustainability is a marathon. It's not a sprint or a race. We're not going to be done by the end of my presentation here in the next 35 or 40 minutes. We won't be done at the end of the week. We won't be done at the end of the year. In fact, probably in sustainability, when we think about it as a one planet, one health prospect, where we plan globally and act locally, we're probably never done with sustainability. We're always striving to improve, doing better tomorrow than we did today, doing better today than we did yesterday. So I'm not going to present a unified roadmap, because sustainability is a journey. We each have our own part in that journey. And the journey has many pathways, and they interconnect at different places. So the journey that I'm on here, right now as I'm speaking to you, is interacting with you. We're crossing paths today because this opportunity that NDDB has provided me. And there's not really a single destination. As I mentioned, sustainability is something that we will probably strive to do each and every day throughout our lives. And our next generation will do that, and the next generation. Every day a bit better than the previous. But there are many stopovers on the way, places where we can say, we have made a difference. Things that we have done that have improved the planet, that have improved our lives, that have improved our animals, that have made the world a better place. So now I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring each of those three pillars. And I'm going to give examples and anecdotes. I don't have any specific data today to present. That would require slides. But I want to go into a little bit more detail each of those three pillars of sustainability, and I'll sprinkle in some examples and some anecdotes. So I'll first start with the environment. When we think about the environment, we think of such things as soil, water, and air. When we look at, from a dairy sector, one of our big sustainability journeys is greenhouse gas mitigation. What do we do to help reduce the increasing global warming that is occurring because of increasing carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide-like gases in the environment? And we each have our own roles to play in this. And this is where I'm going to give two anecdotes. And what I like about these anecdotes are that they are essentially doing the same thing in two different countries, but at very different scales. But at the base, they are entirely the same technology. So yesterday, as part of the technical tour that the IDF board went on, we visited a local family that has a milking center that collects their manure and puts it through a methane digester. Big giant bubble over that methane pit. Then the manure goes off and you're looking to have value added to that manure byproduct. We do the same thing in the United States. We have methane digesters in the United States. But instead of it being on that farm, which looked like they had probably about 15 animals on site, our farms might have 1,000 animals, or they might have 5,000 animals, or they might have 10,000 animals. But at the base, the same technology, collecting that gas from the manure, using it as a fuel source. In the case of the farm that we visited yesterday, they're using it for cooking, replacing wood, replacing purchased gas. In the United States, we compress it and put it into gas pipelines and have it piped to the homes of people. Slightly different ways that we're using the same technology to meet the same goals. That's what I really like about the sustainability journey that we're on in the dairy sector. We have things that we can plan at national and global levels. We have broadly speaking in the dairy sector, a greenhouse gas map to get us to carbon neutrality, get rid of our methane. But we take that information, we bring it back to the local level and implement it at the local level in ways that are best for our own localized industry. Waste management is part of that environment side. That's a second story to what we're doing in greenhouse gas mitigation. Yesterday we saw here in India how you now have a more concentrated, nutrient-dense liquid that comes out of your methane digesters that is then being picked up across a number of your smaller scale methane digesters and processed into value-added fertilizers that are bringing additional value back to those farmers, but also then being able to be utilized not only on their farms, but other farms to replace chemical fertilizers. The more that we can recycle nitrogen within our system, the less commercial nitrogen has to be purchased. And that means less Haber-Bosch process, a process that emits substantial greenhouse gases. In the US, we also will recapture that product after it's gone through our methane digesters. In some cases afterwards, we will filter out the solids, dry them down, and actually use them as bedding for the animals. We'll then take that liquid and apply that to the land at an agronomic rate where we're meeting the nitrogen and phosphorus needs of the crops that we're growing. Again, same concept at the end of the day, but we're doing that in a manner that is appropriate for our localized conditions. And that leads us to water in the environment. We sometimes have problems with water quality because of runoff from our fields, runoff from our barns, runoff from our stables. The more that we can do to collect that manure from those animals and then utilize it as agronomic rates, either through a digester or not through a digester, we are diverting potential nutrients from water so that we have less nitrogen and phosphorus going into our waterways. And then let's think about biodiversity and soil health. The more that we can do for things like minimum tillage, using natural fertilizers, increasing the tilth of the soil, increases productivity of that land. But it also increases the biodiversity, the wildlife that transfers through our fields, through our farms, and even through our stables. And so just that little part, that first pillar in environment, so many things connected, so many things that we are trying to address at the global level, but that takes unique ways to implement at the local level. And yet at that local level, things that are being implemented here in India and things that are being implemented in my own country of the United States are actually very similar. The second pillar of economics, a highly important one. We ask our farmers to do a lot of things. They're at the beginning of the chain before we are able to get that milk to our consumers, in between where we have processors that are transforming it into all sorts of nutritious and delicious dairy products. If we're not profitable at the farmer level, we can't be profitable through the remainder of the value chain. Because if the farmer is not profitable, they can't produce the milk. If the farmer can't produce the milk, the co-op and processor don't have anything to process. So the foundation is starting with profitability at the first part of the chain. But we still need to continue to have value through the remainder part of the chain. Things that our cooperatives do for transporting milk from the farm to their own plants or to a proprietary processing plant. That costs money. The cooperative needs to be able to capture those costs. When the processor is transforming that product from raw milk into pasteurized milk, into cheese, into yogurt, into ice cream, into high-value protein products, they have a cost for doing that. They need to be able to capture that. And at the end of the day, when we are selling these to the consumer, we need to make sure that it's still at a price that they can afford. So it's a very tight chain to make sure that farmers can be profitable. Everyone throughout the chain can be profitable, but we still have the access to food security so that our general population can afford them. And so that gets into things like cost of inputs. So cost of inputs along each part of that chain affects that profitability perspective and what that final cost will be to consumers. On the economic side, we also must look at risk mitigation. There are sometimes things that are out of our control that we need to do our best to try and mitigate. We can think about market disruptions. So I live outside of Boston, Massachusetts, which, as I have told a few people here, when I left to come here a few days ago, the temperature was between -15 and -20 Celsius. I think today it's about 25 Celsius here. That's a big temperature difference. There are dairy farms not too far outside of the city there. We had about 50 centimeters of snow 2 weeks ago. That can be a disruption. What if they can't move their milk for a day or two? What if they lose power? Risk mitigation for them, they might have a generator. Risk mitigation for not being able to move the milk, maybe they have a slightly larger milk container. What happens if we have weather disruptions where you can't move milk for not a day or two, but maybe a week or two, or a month or two, because infrastructure has been destroyed? Think of flooding or tornadoes, hurricanes. Are there ways that we can add risk mitigation products at the primary level so that that can continue to help afford the ability to have that product to go through the dairy value chain? Then I think the last thing I'm going to just talk about a little bit in the economic pillar, and this is not an exhaustive list in any of these pillars, is the impact on the local economy. We know that agriculture, and particularly dairy farming, brings a lot of value to the local economy. But there's also a need to have critical infrastructure and critical mass. And I think of the one dairy cow farm in Alaska in the United States. So Alaska is separated quite geographically from the continental United States. Alaska is a big, large area. It is very cold. This one only dairy cow farm in Alaska has a robotic milker. They have to be prepared to handle their own disruptions because it may take days for them to get a technician to come to their farm because their technician is a 5-hour flight away. So their impact on the local economy is different. They don't quite have that same infrastructure that somebody might have, say in our area in Wisconsin, which we call America's Dairyland, which has 5,000 dairy farms, or to the village where we went yesterday with the milk collection site. Moving on to the third pillar, social. This is perhaps the one that is the most varied. So environment, I think, is pretty easy to get your head wrapped around: air, water, soil. Economics, it's not all about money, but it's profitability, a lot about money. Social is kind of everything else, and it's a really big one. We could think about such things as labor. In some places of the world, there are issues with availability of labor. We can also think about, from the labor side, fair wages. Is everybody that is working in the dairy sector, from the farm to the drivers, to the plants, to the distributors, is everyone getting fair wages? And safe working conditions. Agriculture in general is an industry that is more dangerous. Working with livestock makes it even more dangerous. What can we do to make the safest work environment possible? I touched on it a little bit in the economic side about our consumers being able to have a product that they can afford. Food accessibility is highly important. Part of that is price. Part of it is also distribution. We distribute food in lots of different ways, and there are places even within a few miles of where I live outside of Boston, Massachusetts, that we would call a food desert. They do not have access to high quality grocery stores. They have access only to small, expensive stores. If they do not have the ability to drive or take public transportation to a more comprehensive grocery store, they may have lacked to food products that give them a full nutritional package. And if they are buying from smaller stores, they may have a lack of diversity in products. So maybe they have one brand of milk, one type of yogurt. Maybe there's no ice cream at all. And I think people should have ice cream every day. Another is what I call social license to operate. When we think about how we, starting from the farmer all the way through the dairy chain, operate, it's, in some aspects, it's a privilege to be food producers, to be able to giving nutritious substances to people that cannot produce it themselves. Or we've given them the luxury to do something else with their lives. But there is a social license to operate. In my very specific area, that's animal welfare and how we use antimicrobials and how we address antimicrobial resistance. The animals are the ones that allow us to have this dairy value chain. And we know that the better we treat the animals, the better they treat us. And that's treating them through things like the 5 freedoms. It's helping to prevent disease. It's also understanding if they are diseased or injured, what is the right course of action for that animal? And sometimes the right course of action for an animal may be euthanasia, because we don't want those animals to suffer. And then things like antimicrobial resistance. And I'm going to give an example here that involves kind of that global context and how we bring it back to local implementation. I've had the privilege for the past 3 years to serve on the Global Leaders Group on Antimicrobial Resistance, which is a group that was put together by what's called the Quadripartite Secretariat. That's the World Health Organization, the United Nations Environmental Program, the Food and Agricultural Organization in the United Nations, and the World Organization for Animal Health. And it's a very small group on this Global Leaders Group. I am essentially the only food representative on that. I'm not the dairy representative, not the global dairy representative. I'm not the US dairy representative. I'm kind of a global food industry representative. That's got a lot of weight on my shoulders, being in that group. But what has this group done? They worked very diligently on the second United Nations high-level meeting on antimicrobial resistance, which occurred in 2024. At that high-level meeting, the United Nations came out with its second political declaration on AMR. AMR is a global issue. Any use of antimicrobials has the potential to impact antimicrobial resistance. So the UN comes out with this very big high-level pronouncement. That's very grand. Through that actions, individual countries and national authorities have their own implementation plans. So then the governments are starting to bring it down more to to at least the national level. In those plans, they ask different actors within society to take action. We are actors in society in the dairy sector. We do use antimicrobials, and we should have the ability to use antimicrobials when they are necessary for the health and welfare of the animal. But can we do a better job of how we use antimicrobials? The answer is yes. And if we're able to use antimicrobials better, we take our part of that puzzle of antimicrobial resistance and hopefully make it a smaller part of the potential issue. And how do we do that? Well, through the International Dairy Federation, working with the World Organization for Animal Health, we updated our guidelines for the judicious and prudent use of antimicrobials in the dairy sector. Again, now that's a global dairy standard and guidelines. We need to implement those at the local level. So what do we do in a US context? We have an on-farm animal welfare program that includes working with veterinarians, that includes having protocols for the prevention, treatment, and control of common diseases. That's the context that we've taken into our local situation. What have I seen here in India? You have on your phone, for your farmers that are involved in the formalized market, not only their payment scheme, in many places they can order a veterinarian through a mobile vet lab, helping to make informed decisions about how you treat animals. which may include antimicrobial use. There's also things like vaccines. NDDB is the largest vaccine manufacturer for FMD, which you do not treat with antimicrobials, but you make other vaccines as well that are utilized throughout your dairy sector that help reduce the need for antimicrobials. And then the last thing I want to touch on in social is what we call in the US diversity, equity, inclusion. I think you might know it a bit more under like things like gender equity. But also in the US, we have minorities that participate in our dairy sector. We have a religious minority called the Amish. They are an Anabaptist Christian community. In some ways, their dairies look a bit similar to many of your dairies. They do not use electricity. They do not have tractors. They milk by hand. We work very hard to ensure within our own dairy sector in the United States that they are part of our dairy sector because they're an important part of our community. And every country has different parts of their dairy sector that are unique to them, that are an important part of their dairy community, that you want to make sure continue to be part of your dairy community. And I'm going to go into, I've gone through kind of the 3 pillars of environment, economic, and social. I'm going to give just a couple more examples that are kind of maybe a bit unique. And these are just things that I know because of my role that I've had in the International Dairy Federation, not because I've necessarily had any hand in them. Norway is an interesting one to me. Had the opportunity to go to Tromsø, Norway, which is above the Arctic Circle. We were there in June of 2023. They are so far north, the sun does not set for about 6 weeks. When I got there, I was hoping to have like, you know, a 2 a.m. sunset, and I Googled when does the sun set, and it told me sometime in July. And I'm like, Google must be wrong. But what do they do in Norway? Norway has a milk quota system that's based on geography. They have decided as a country that they want milk production throughout their entire country. I would imagine it's rather difficult, and we went to a couple of dairy farms north of the Arctic Circle where it had snowed just the week before we got there during their growing season. It's very difficult to produce up there, but they as a country, as their society, have decided they want milk produced throughout their entire country, and they've done that through a quota-based system that is tied to geography. They are taking their part of sustainability and wanting their sustainability to include a vibrant dairy sector across the entire country. That means they've had to devise a system that makes those farms way in the north be economically viable, even when their cost of production might be twice as much as those further south. Then last October, we had the opportunity where the International Dairy Federation's World Dairy Summit was held in Chile, in South America. Got to learn a little bit more about their system. They participate in the dairy sector there participates in a process called the Chile Conscious Origin Project. And what it is environmental, social, and economic programs and audits from the dairy farms through the dairy sector, looking at indicators and seeing how they're doing on benchmarks, addressing and analyzing and evaluating how are they doing on what they've put together for their sustainability journey. And when people are having difficulty with their sustainability journey, how can they help them improve? So some of their indicators are in the animal welfare realm. So what happens when a farmer doesn't meet a benchmark for animal welfare? Some in civil society may say, well, if they don't meet the benchmark, maybe they shouldn't be in the dairy sector. What they need is they need the ability to make the improvements. And I think that's what's important, is in this process of the sustainability journey, where we all need to make improvements along all parts of the dairy value chain, we need to allow them the opportunity to make improvements. And so I just thought that that was really interesting. And it's actually very similar to what we do in the United States through our National Dairy Farm Program and our Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, which is my country's own sustainability journey in the dairy sector. I'm going to spend a few moments here just talking a little bit about the role of IDF before I close out. So IDF, the International Dairy Federation, almost 125 years old. Standards, evidence, and frameworks. They're like the global brain trust for the global dairy sector. So when we think about global standards and guidelines, I previously mentioned the prudent use of antimicrobials. There's the LCA methodology that they have that's now in its second version, and they have with that a carbon verification tool so that we can understand when country A has their own model that they're using, country B has their own model that they're using, their answers may be a bit different, but are they following the framework? It's not that we want to compare country to country. What we want to know is if they're using a model that they're trying to demonstrate that they are making progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, is that model actually working, and does it follow the agreed upon international standards from the International Dairy Federation? There's also, of course, hundreds of ISO IDF standards, and about 100 of those are utilized in the codex processes. IDF also looks at providing evidence. Evidence can have a lot of different looks to it. I'm just going to focus on two. They do an IDF dairy sustainability outlook publication yearly. Really what that is a lot of case studies from around the world. They also do a similar one called the IDF Animal Health Report. Also, case studies from around the world, focusing on research and field implementation. In 2024, when the United Nations had its high-level meeting on antimicrobial resistance and had its second political declaration, the same day that they had their meeting, IDF released its animal health report, which focused on case studies looking at antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance activities from around the world, with over 20 articles from around the world. Evidence what we are doing. And then frameworks. Things like the Paris Dairy Declaration on Sustainability that was announced in Paris at the World Dairy Summit there in 2024. Looking at, we have many companies that are now making commitments in sustainability publicly. How are they progressing? What is their transparency in providing information? At times, we need to hold our own feet to the fire to make sure that we're accountable. Because if we just say we're doing something but don't actually do it, we're actually not on that sustainability journey. And so as I conclude here, I'll just remind you about the three pillars. It's environment, economics, and social, the three pillars of sustainability. The three themes: one planet, one health. Plan global and act local. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. And now as I close out here in the last maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I've talked with Dr. Manish Shah quite a bit about succession planning, the next generation of dairy leaders in research at our farms, in our plants, in our cooperatives, in our processors. And he wanted me to speak a little bit about what my own journey has been. I grew up on a dairy farm in New York State. On my mother's side, that part of the family came to the United States in the early 1700s. That side of the family has had people in the dairy sector that entire time. On my father's side of the family, they were immigrants from the Netherlands after World War II. My father was 7 years old when they immigrated, and when 2 years after they immigrated, my grandfather on that side of the family was able to start his own farm. When I was growing up, we had 100 cows in a freestall barn in New York State in the 1970s and 1980s. That was a large dairy farm in New York State at the time. When my father and uncle got out of the dairy farming end of agriculture around 2001 or 2, 100 cows wasn't very large anymore. It was still larger than the average farm in New York at the time. But the average dairy farm size in the US today is about 375 cows. And so, changes in the industry. I knew that I wasn't going to go back to the farm and be a dairy farmer, but I knew that I was interested in the dairy industry. And you heard a bit about my kind of meanderings through the educational system. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, and when I decided that I was not going to go to veterinary school, I looked at graduate school and had an opportunity to have some very good mentors at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and the University of Maryland, where I did my PhD, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., which is how I got into kind of the policy end of dairy. My family was in a dairy cooperative. My father, at one point in time, was president of the cooperative. Instilled in me that cooperative spirit. So it was with great pride, just a little over 20 and a half years ago, that I was able to join the current organization that I work for, the National Milk Producers Federation. Their members are dairy cooperatives and their dairy farmer owners. It's coming back full circle to kind of being able to help the cooperatives and the farmers that I kind of grew up in. But I didn't know 20 and a half years ago that that journey would take me to places like this. And it's an opportunity where you start from one place. You never know where your own journey is going to be. Through opportunities that my organization allowed me to do, I was able to get into some of the IDF work, some of the work in Codex, some of the work with the World Organization for Animal Health, taking knowledge that I had developed domestically and helping to apply it internationally. And before I knew it, I've been 20 and a half years in my role with National Milk Producers Federation. I got elected to the chair of the Science Program Coordinating Committee at IDF and spent 5 years on the board. That role ended last October, and I was going to take a little bit of time from doing some leadership roles, and a couple weeks ago, I was asked to lead a task force. But I think the story there is there's opportunities in your dairy career. Take a look at your mentors and have them help you. Take a look at the opportunities that you are presented and seize them. If I didn't seize the opportunities of even just going to college instead of going back to my home farm, I wouldn't be here today. And of course, so many people get you to that own individual journey. So that was a little bit about my sustainability journey in dairy as myself, and hopefully some really thoughtful and thought-provoking ideas on the sustainability journey that the dairy sector is going through. I do think we have some time for questions if you would like, and I'd be happy to take any. Thank you. Yes.
Dr. Jemmy, it was a very nice journey hand-holding us some of the fundamentals and very realistic issues about dairying, whether it's any part of the world. And I just personally, one time I interviewed one veterinarian for the Amish community. So what is their status right now, and how do they survive without mechanization? Is there any lesson for us who are in the mainstream dairying?
Yeah, so, and Marilyn Hershey lives in one of the largest Amish areas in the United States, so she'd probably be better to answer than I am. Amish dairy farms represent about 1 out of every 3 dairy farms in the U.S., so not an insignificant number of farms. Less in terms of the milk volume. And for religious reasons, they do not use modern technologies. So how have they survived? Well, they've had to adapt and work within our regulatory system. So we have something called the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, which every licensed dairy farm in the U.S. Has to implement and has to pass inspections at least twice a year. That's inspections on their farm, and then there's, of course, the testing of the milk for quality and safety. So they have to implement those. How do we get around some of the requirements of that? Things like refrigeration, which cannot be done on an Amish farm because they don't have electricity. This is where the co-ops and processors have helped. Communal milk houses. So we think about the village milk collection center we went to yesterday with the board. with all the farmers bringing their milk to that milk collection center. These communal milk houses for Amish dairy farms are not all that different. They bring milk in cans twice a day, except on Sunday, to these communal milk houses. The difference is each farm has its own little bulk tank. Otherwise, it's very similar. And then that milk is picked up, goes through the appropriate testing. So they survive by having industry help them. They survive by being innovative in their own production schemes. You may think that because they do not have electricity, they do not have tractors, they are generally relatively high production in the US for grass-based, pasture-based systems. So it's not uncommon for an Amish farm to have 8,000 liters per year per cow. I've been on Amish farms that are 14,000 liters per cow per year. So there are things that they can do to work within our system where high production is one of the keys to the profitability in our base system. And they've been able to adapt that while still keeping to their religious ideals. But they will, they will use sex semen, they will use artificial insemination. So, they adopt the technologies that can work within their systems.
Hello. My question to you is that when we look at sustainability, the concept of sustainability, I see three phases. One is the social phase, the second is financial, and third is environmental. In India, from Indian perspective, this is a tightrope walk to strike a balance in the environmental sustainability and the financial sustainability. Because if we weigh more on the environmental sustainability to achieve that, there is a cost. So which strikes a dent to the financial sustainability. So from a global perspective, what are your views on this? Thank you.
Yes, it's a very difficult tightrope because greenhouse gas emissions, most greenhouse gas emissions in most systems are coming from the farm before the milk leaves the farm. That's where a lot of focus is. And it's very easy for somebody way up here, whether a CPG company, a food service company, a restaurant company, a supermarket, making demands. But if they're not willing to help find solutions how to implement things so that they can be affordable at the production level, we run into difficulties. And this is where I think we look at how do we help monetize those environmental benefits. And there's different ways of doing that. We talked a little bit earlier about methane digesters and the value that that's bringing back to some of your farmers here in India, and the value that that's bringing back to some of our farmers in the United States. And an ancillary product from that is a value-added manure product that's bringing additional value back to some of your farmers here, and it's bringing some additional value and cost savings back to some of our farmers in the United States. In some cases, there does need to be market incentives. And we have some of that in the US. I don't know as much about some of your payment schemes here. I know that in talking, with hearing from Dr. Manish and Dr. Sodhi, when he was on the IDF board, the significant amount of that retail dollar that's returned back to your farmers in the formal market system, I think our farmers are very envious of that in the US. But that is another way to help bring that value back to the farmers so that they can implement changes in their systems to help address climate change and other environmental practices. But that is a very difficult tightrope. We cannot ask the farmer to continually to be the bearer of all of that cost because it's a societal cost. We need to have that nutrient-dense dairy product for everybody at an affordable price, but we also want to make sure that we continue to decrease our environmental footprint. And we've got to balance those carefully, and it takes some creativity. Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to give you this talk today. And I hope that your sustainability journey, whether it's for the dairy sector or your own personal one, brings you great joy.
So that was a wonderful presentation or talk you delivered. It has been a pleasure and enlightening for all of us to listen to you. Thank you, Dr. Jonker. May I now request Dr. Shah to present a memento to Dr. Jonker as a mark of our appreciation and gratitude. So may I now request Dr. Shah to say a few words.
So thank you, Dr. Jimmy Jonker. I think as a fellow board member for almost 3 years, as the SPCC chair, he was on the board of IDF, and it was always my wish that at some day he come and shares some of his views on the sustainability, which we often discuss in the IDF board. He traveled to India 2-3 times in between for some or other symposium or conference, but then we could not organize such a talk by him. So I'm happy that at least today, on the occasion of symposium of non-bovine milk, we could invited him. He accepted our invitation. He is here and also delivered a very, very insightful talk on sustainability of the entire dairy value chain. I think I'll not repeat, but then environment, economy, and the social aspects. Few things from our side. I think having signed the net zero declaration with Global Dairy Platform and also the Paris Declaration on the sustainability during the World Dairy Summit in Paris, I think NDDB initiated the sustainability journey in India. We had taken the lead role in the sector. What we have started is first, measuring the carbon footprint or measuring the water footprint in the sector. We have retained TERI, which is a #1 organization in our country, research-based organization, who will do the carbon footprint study and water footprint study for us. And that is the first step, because if we have to reduce emissions, if you have to, tight the value chain for sustainability, I think first it is important that we know where we are. And if I am not wrong, I think in 2-3 months' time, Bhupender, in 2-3 months' time, we will have the report ready. That will be a first step towards our journey. Some of our work, which we have already initiated, thinking that these are important aspect of the sustainability. I think first and foremost thing in the Indian context is producing more milk from fewer animals, because after all, it is the animal who emit methane, and if we are able to reduce the number of animals, we will automatically reduce the emission also. And that's why I think the entire productivity enhancement initiatives what NDDB has taken, whether it is the sex-sorted semen, having more female cows, whether it is the genomic chip development, allowing the best elite animals for the breeding program in the country, or some of our work on for example, ethno-veterinary medicine for mitigating the AMR issue. I think they all are aimed at improving the productivity of animal. We are on a right track. In fact, last 10 years, we have seen that the percentage productivity growth in terms of the animal productivity of India is highest in the world. We have almost growth of 26% in last 10 years. So the strategies which we have adopted are right, in the right direction, and we will continue with the same. And the second initiative is, of course, the manure management initiative. I think entire board was able to visit yesterday our small scale, you know, bio, biogas at the farmer's backyard. I wish to clarify that we do have the centralized model like the model which you have in US. We have taken large capacity dung at a centralized location, 4,000 cubic meter biodigesters, almost same as the US, which we have seen in some of the farms. There we are purifying the uh, biogas, compressing and using for the vehicle mobility. We also have one more solution where this biogas is fed to the boiler directly into the processing plant for taking care of the thermal energy of the plant. And Government of India is now laying the pipeline almost on a similar line of US, where all these compressed biogas manufacturers or producers, they will have option to connect to the grid of pipeline, and they will also get the payment. So I think a lot of things are happening on the manure management initiative also, and we are very uh, you know sure that some of the commitments which we have made, not only to global dairy platform or the Paris declaration, but our own vision of making this sector net zero by 2047 when we achieve the 100th year of our independence. So uh, I think with those words, thank you again, Dr. Jamie Jonker. It was wonderful to listen to you, and I think all our employees, not only who are present here, it was actually live on the YouTube, and many of our subsidiary employees also joined virtually. I think it will give them a lot of insights on the sustainability on the dairy value chain. So thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, sir. We now come to the end of this function. So I would like to thank you all for this participation and would like to invite you to join for a cup of tea outside the auditorium. Thank you.